Why don't you start by just introducing yourselves, a little bit of your background, and why you're here at the Esri conference.
So my name's Schleicher, and I'm a GIS analyst with the Greater Salt Lake Municipal Services District. And my background is I come from non-profit originally, where I was doing conservation work, but now I'm doing addressing for local government.
Yeah, and I'm James Burton. I'm the senior GIS analyst for the MSD. My background, I guess, would be I've done a lot of different stuff, but one of my big jobs was as a consultant for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, where we created a lot of almost real-time dashboards, which was one of the first things we did for them, but then moved into local government, where I've been doing addressing for a little while and moved on to doing a drone program and starting that last year.
And my name is Matthew Starley. I'm a long-range planner with the MSD. Background is landscape architecture and bioregional planning, and did a little bit of landscape architecture out in Denver, and then moved back to Utah, and I've been getting more into the planning and regional planning field.
Yeah, that sounds great. So you did some presentations at the Esri User Conference. Can you tell me about what you presented and the project is that's of interest here at this event?
Go for it, man.
May as well let Marie start.
I'll introduce it. So yesterday we presented. Well, I was in a presentation with Matt and James yesterday morning for. It was called Tech-Driven Renaissance, and it was Magna's Historic District Revival. And it's where Matt had been working on a 2D PDF format long-range plan for Magna City, particularly with focus on it after an earthquake had struck. It was 5.7 magnitude in 2020. And so while that caused damage to historical structures, it also opened up funding opportunity for restoration and development. And so Matt came to the GIS team and asked us to collaborate on a project that could take his plan and turn it into a 3D interactive tool for the community, which I'll let him speak more to.
It was really nice to have that 3D tool because, in a historic district, because we're, now a registered historic place, with the Park Service and things of that nature, there's a lot of constraints that we have to work in. So you're trying to match that historic style and scale and things of that nature. So to be able to have that 3D representation is a great way to ensure that we're kind of meeting those marks, getting our digital twin and having the materials match and the fill and things of that nature. And then it's also very nice to have that digital twin to be able to communicate those ideas with the public. In a historic district like that, you've got a lot of really entrenched ideas, so people who really feel strongly about what the future of the area should be, so it's very nice to be able to fly them in there and take the conversation into what the future is going to look like, rather than reiterating once again what's not working currently.
So tell me a little bit about Magna City. Is that what it's called? And why did they need a historical 3D model? How is it being used? And I know in your other presentation you probably have the pictures to show everybody. I can look later, but can you describe it a little bit through words?
Yeah, sure. Magna's kind of a unique town. It's one of the only towns in Salt Lake County that wasn't established as a Mormon settlement or an LDS settlement. And so along with those Mormon settlements, you get a very specific grid type. They're all 660 blocks squared out and things of this nature. So it kind of forces a Utah development pattern. But in Magna, it's very different. It was a mining town, established maybe in the early 1800s, or late 1800s, excuse me. And so, with that, you get a lot of skiwampus street angles and very irregular partial shapes that are maybe very skinny and super long and things. So being able to have that 3D model was really nice for us, because we could iterate design and come to kind of a consensus with the Planning Commission and Council. And so that led to the development of new zoning within the district that would accommodate the kind of development that we need. And then the other thing that was unique about it, or kind of really important for the tool, was the idea that with the historic structures, there's a lot of retail and service square feet kind of baked into that development. And so what we wanted to do is make sure that we were reaching targets established by the kind of retail and service square feet that we wanted to support. So after doing a lot of background study and stuff like that, we kind of came up with the target of about 1,000 new residents for the district. At least like 300 new units, And then it also provides a unique opportunity to get a scale of development that really isn't present currently in the city. It's Utah, so we're kind of sprawly. So 95% or 90% of the housing that's available currently is detached single-family homes. So by kind of just diversifying the housing offering in the area, we can hopefully catch a wider spectrum of folks that need affordable housing.
So who are the main users? Is this the Magna City Department for tracking its own parcels? Is this for the public, or is it all of the above? Or who's using this and why?
So basically it's all in service of a 2D area plan, and so it'll be a guiding document for Magna City. So it had to go through their planning commission and get a recommendation, and then it'll eventually be adopted by the city council. So it'll be used to help Magna leadership make decisions on a number of projects going forward. So we're touching development and open space and active transportation opportunities and coordination with UTA and things of that nature in the city. So in the end, it's kind of just a long list of projects and development ideas, but hopefully we can utilize the document to coalesce a little bit of energy behind it, and then once the city has its ducks in a row, we can then kind of project that to the development community to say, hey, here's what we like, here's what we want, we're all behind this, we have some solutions to get it in, who wants to invest in us?
So for others who may be considering doing something in their areas, how would you describe your interaction with the community leaders and how they're responsive to this, what they think they can get from this, and maybe just a little bit of advice on how to work with those type of people?
Yeah, for sure. The 3D environment is just a really effective communication tool. A lot of times, especially in a historic area, you have a lot of people with entrenched ideas. They have very solid ideas about what they think the future should look like, and usually it's pretty reflective of the past. So it can be intimidating to talk about anything that's, change. And also there's a reflexive kind of pushback against anything that's multifamily housing in a community that hasn't seen a ton of it. So, with the 3D modeling, we can take them into that environment and show them a result that doesn't feel intimidating, doesn't feel terrible, is actually maybe kind of attractive, and hopefully something that they can see is intended to complement the character that the district already has, but bring in more residents, bring in more people to the streets that actually care about the place because it becomes their backyard and something that they're invested in.
So in this 3D model, how do you're showing proposed developments and what they might look like, so that you encourage people that, hey, this is what it could look like? How would you be working with developers to accompany that? Is that a separate area, or is that just all get put into the model depending on who's wants to?
Yeah, our model's great. It's all based off of drone work that James was able to do. So we have an awesome digital twin that's put together from the drone mesh and things of that nature. And so what the models do is give kind of like a user scenario for a max build out for our new zoning in the area. So with all of these models, none of it's guaranteed, none of it's going to be exactly like that. But what we're trying to do is show what that full build out could potentially be, and then utilize some of the tools that come with the Esri products, in urban, to track the numbers and things like that, so we can put as much reality behind it as we possibly can. Because urban will give us metrics, it'll give us feedback, every square foot of space use that you put in there, you can generate a lot of feedback based on any kind of category that you want to set up, so we have construction costs and increased property values and number of housing units and jobs created and daily trips and all these things that we can use to justify those numbers that I was talking about in the first, where we're saying, we're kind of slow, we lack vitality, we've got a lot of vacancy. But if we can hit these targets, that should probably get us to where we want to be.
Where are the input numbers coming from? Are those from real information, or is the Esri model kind of developing them from other scenarios that are similar?
As the user of the product, you get to tailor those all individually. So different space use types will have different numbers associated. If it's an apartment or a studio or something like that, it's going to have a different per square foot value on on the build out and things of that nature. So we did as much research as we possibly could to try and make sure that we were matching what seemed right. And then it's really great to have those metrics, because as you're developing out these large scenarios, it can function to give you a pretty quick gut check to see if are we getting completely unrealistic and into fantasy land at this point, and do we need to back it down a little bit to meet numbers that seem like they match other like products that are built out in communities that are nearby and things of that nature.
For those numbers, we used the urban consulting hours. We got, the Esri urban team helped us do the math and make sure those were good, and so they are based on localized conditions, right? It's not just something we grabbed from California that they use. It's tailored to Magna City.
Yep, and there's a lot of places that you can look to that'll have, just general, like this is what it's costing to do commercial space per square foot, and this is what it's costing to do residential space per square foot. And so like Kempsey Gardner in Utah is a research institute that puts out a lot of those numbers and stuff. So just going on what they have, and then what the retail square footage is renting for, and those things as well, just kind of studies that have been done.
Okay, so if someone's trying to set this up, gather as much local knowledge information as you can from whatever sources you might have available. Is that a decent bit of advice?
We're definitely renting a little lower than they are in Redlands. So we had to adjust that a little bit, coming back to Magna, Utah. So, yeah.
So since we're at the Esri conference, tell me a little bit about the technology used from them, how it's developed, where you got it from. Just kind of, can you cover the GIS aspects of where it started and how it was built?
Yeah, definitely. It does use a wide variety of tools and licensing from Esri. We use ArcGIS Urban as well as Trimble SketchUp, and then the drone mesh, which utilized SiteScan. So there's a good breadth and variety of stuff that we were able to, we really wanted to use all the tools we had in our disposal and see how we could integrate all of those into one, product. And that was the end goal. So we flew our drone and we processed with SiteScan, or initially drone to map, then switched to SiteScan. That gave us a good mesh to work with for our existing conditions. And then Matt in ArcGIS Urban was creating these space use forms that lined up with the zoning that we had created for this area. And then there was kind of a collaboration between Matt and I to create these Trimble SketchUp models. And then he was sending me those, and I was putting them into ArcGIS Pro and publishing them into a scene in ArcGIS Online. And that's where we really compiled everything as an ArcGIS scene. Urban's nice because you can pull a scene into Urban and then re-export it. And then, Experience Builder was kind of where that ended up. Marie, do you want to talk about Experience Builder?
Yeah, so we selected a few different of the key themes throughout the master plan that Matt had created, and create a website that has about 4 or 5 pages, and it walks through the history of the historic core, which is where we've got our initial 3D web scene that walks the user through current conditions and kind of a look into historic building locations and potential development proposals. And then we also have on a different page a 2D web map which talks about other various aspects of the master plan, like what you could envision in terms of streetscape furniture, for example. And then on our development scenario page, we've got these 3 different scenarios that demonstrates Matt's urban space use types that he put together, where they can also find all of these metrics in each case scenario as well.
Okay, so what did you think things to be learned by doing this project that, until you dive in and start creating something, you might not have learned otherwise? What were some key things that you took from this project and can use toward future work?
Everything. I hadn't really used Urban before. I had been introduced to it by Matt briefly, so it was really fascinating for me to sit on those like the urban office hours and the hours that James spoke to, where we were able to consult with them and just learn about more of the program in general. It was also really interesting to see how James was bringing in these DAE models into Pro and resizing them. So there was a lot of 3D work in Pro that I hadn't done before, and then for me also Experience Builder, just the widgets and the layout options that you have there and the ability of it to store and reference all of this information and configure it in a way that lets you tailor your story to your audience so that they can really engage with getting behind the growth of Magna.
Good.
Yeah, for me, it was all stuff that we could do in silo programs, so we knew how to 3D model in SketchUp, we knew how to do a bunch of stuff in GIS and with the drone. But it was the first opportunity to get it all compiled into one place and in a product that's really easy to deliver. So you can share a link, people can go in and check it out, or we can utilize it as basically a traveling presentation tool. So, we've had opportunities to share what we were able to do at our local Esri user groups with different community organizations within Magna, and then with the Planning Commission and Council and things like that.
Okay. Any other particular learning experiences that you took from this that might be able to do going forward? Other plans for this tool?
Well, hopefully it is going to be a repeatable and replicable project that we could utilize in other jurisdictions, because we don't just represent Magna, we represent 6 other areas throughout Salt Lake County. And I would just say, I think, the collaboration between Matt with his Trimble SketchUp and me in ArcGIS Pro and getting those published ArcGIS Online took a little learning, just because those file sizes are really large, and the DAE object files that he was giving me are a little tough to work with, but we learned how to kind of reduce those file sizes and remove elements that we didn't need, so that they published and drew better in ArcGIS Online.
And now that we know that we can publish these 3D sites, that are compiled with a bunch of information, there's tons of ways that I want to use it in the office now. Like, I'd love to take our zone code and kind of build it out in that same way, so you get these 3D representations of setbacks and building form that's expected, just to make it more approachable for a general audience. And then, since we're a municipal services district that serves multiple communities, we're hoping that we'll be able to take what we know and apply it in some of our other communities and some of the other zones that might have some undeveloped space and development opportunities, so we can help to shape that in the clearest way possible to make collaboration between the community and developers as easy as possible.
Can you share some of those tips and tricks that you got to reduce file sizes? Like, what did you actually do there? Brief description.
Yeah, to be brief. So, when you're using the warehouse, you want to save when you're using SketchUp, you want to save as much time as possible by using the warehouse. And so, when we were first going through, we would get these very lovely buildings with a lot of interior work and sinks and faucets and door handles, and then by the time I tried to send them to James, they'd be like $250K. So we really had to pull back, simplify, only shells. And then there was a few things that we had to figure out, like we would get this flashy response, from the colorization. And so we had to paint both sides of all surfaces to make sure that we wouldn't get that. And then James had to do a lot of figuring to make sure that what I would send him would get into the right place and size and fit and scale and look like it's supposed to eventually.
Yeah.
How long did this process kind of play out of figuring things out as you went along to get it to where it was most usable and effective?
Doing the SketchUp back and forth, that process. I don't know, what would you say? We definitely passed a fair few models back and forth until we were like real happy.
I mean, it wasn't happening every day, but it probably took us, a month and a half of kind of working with it before we got things where it was like, okay, that's the final. We can just use that and move forward.
Right, and that's the trouble with serving multiple communities, is you do have to have a lot of hats in the air at the same time that you're juggling, so we weren't able to just fully dedicate on it. But yeah, it took some back and forth, but now I'm fairly confident that we could get any model out there and have it looking good without too many tries right now.
And they're supposed to be making that process smoother,
That's true. Yeah, Esri's been improving the ability to do it. So,
what are you going to be working on next, as far as just this model or expanding it out?
We're actually going to be working on, in the same area, we're working on a parking study. So Matt's continuing to collaborate with the GIS team. We'll be out collecting drone imagery to kind of provide insights and recommendations on future planning for parking supply and demand in Magna City. So that's one project that we'll be working on together.
Yeah, and then we'll pitch a few others. We have a second commercial area out in Kearns, which is a similar community to Magna, and so hopefully we'll be able to utilize everything that we learned in the Kearns Town Center. Magna has a few other commercial zones that could probably use this application as well, so it'll be fun to put them there.
Okay, so I was asking the details of how people do things, because I think the most important point of an interview like this is what you can tell other people who might be working on something similar, what they can learn from this, and maybe they can skip through some of the things that took you guys a long time, or some shortcuts that can ease their process. So if you're talking to somebody who's in a similar position as you guys, someplace else, wanting to do this, what's the advice that you would give them?
It's tough. I mean, it took us just kind of working through it, and we definitely figured out some things along the way. I would say, just having a good idea of what your end product is going to be would be really helpful, because I think we took a few iterations. We had one website that we kind of just like cut and slashed and took apart and rebuilt it. So it took us a few tries of like slapping a bunch of content into Experience Builder and whittling it away and then kind of re-editing it again. But I don't know if we would have known that from the beginning. It's like it kind of just takes you getting in there and getting your hands dirty to figure out what works best for you. So I guess my advice would just be not to be afraid to, put something up there and delete it and try again and just figure out what works.
I guess what I would say would be make sure you have real solid justification before you start working on modeling and representation and things like that. Because you will get a decent amount of pushback, based on the visuals that you show, no matter what they are. If it was a one-story building, somebody's going to be upset about that. If it's a tall one, somebody's going to be upset about that. So, knowing that you're working towards very specific targets and goals, so you're not having to redo that process. And so when you do show a beautiful image, it's not just a beautiful image, but it's founded in some logic and some, has some basis behind it. So you're not just arguing for the visual, but everything that the visual represents.
I think also just a couple of add-ons is definitely use all of the resources that you have, and even if that's different departments around you, they're always full of insightful information. And also working with the Esri staff was really helpful, and just keep in mind who your audience is and gear your project towards them and with them in mind.
One thing I thought of is Kennecott. We put a bunch of work into developing scenarios on some property that they just said no. And so, maybe knowing that ahead of time would have saved us some time.
Yeah, for sure. And we might have had kind of an inkling, but we were hoping that with the visuals we might be a little bit more convincing, or see if we could alter their minds. But we didn't, and so we just dropped it all and moved on into other areas.
How about someone starting at like some must-haves that they really, if they want to start something, this is what you really got to start with at a minimum.
Right.
An awesome IT team.
An awesome IT team, GIS work. Yeah. No, I think urban is like the base of it, right? Like you could do it without the mesh for existing conditions. You could do it without Trimble, SketchUp to show the final forms, but urban is like the core of it.
Mm-hmm. And it's things that architects and landscape architects and planners and things like that have been doing for a long time, but typically it's hand calculations, and it was trace paper and over the top of maps and things like that. So the urban just makes it so much quicker, smoother, easier to show, demonstrate, share with other people. It's just really been a fun tool for working through these urban design problems.
Let's see. I think that's about it. And then one takeaway that you'll take from this project, no matter what else you do next.
I think, for me, I was never prepared for how much attention that we would get for it, and that's been really humbling. But also, I guess, don't be, kind of speaking to what James said earlier, like, don't be scared to fail, but also equally don't be as scared to succeed either, because that's been really fantastic in terms of growth.
Yeah, I agree.